Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for joining us. Thriving Amidst Uncertainty from Monex USA. My name is Simon Miles. I'm going to be your host this evening. It's this evening for me. I'm in London office at Monex. I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping bits at the beginning here. The format of today, we're going to start by opening up the discussion around the uncertainty that we're seeing on a global level at the moment, both economically and geopolitically. The running order is going to be over the course of probably the next 40 to 45 minutes, starting with that economic breakdown. And then we're going to move into understanding how you can protect against that uncertainty. What can you actually do today to protect you with what, let's face it, are probably some of the most uncertain times that we've seen for many years. At the end of the webinar, we're going to be sending all of the registrations, the slides for today, the presentation. And by all means, please go and find us on LinkedIn, Monex USA, if you're not following us already. So today I am joined by two individuals from Monex USA. We've got John Min, who is the Chief Economist. Hi, John. And we've got Helen Given, who is the Associate Director of Trading. They're going to be taking us through some of the content today and some of the discussion around this subject, thriving amongst the uncertainty. So with that, let's get going. So I guess before we get onto how to thrive, we've got to look at, what the uncertainty is. And I think that uncertainty that seems to be among us across the globe, not just nationally in the US, but in certain other areas of the world. So, John, coming to you first, if I may, there's lots of places we could start, right? But let's start with some of the main considerations in regards to current economic conditions. It's certainly a very uncertain world right now. Give us an overview of kind of what's going on right now, both nationally and globally, and we can start the conversation there.
Sure, Simon. Before we talk about uncertainty, I just want to congratulate our Fed, the Federal Reserve of the United States. They're pulling off something that I thought was improbable, which was soft landing. And definition of soft landing is, as you can see, that's the inflation rate in the United States. At one point, we went up to 9%, which is crazy. We have not seen that since 1980s. And now we managed to bring it down. When I say now, the Fed managed to bring it down consciously to about 3%. And we're very close to 2%, which is their explicit target. But if you look at the red bar, it's kind of on the bottom of it, that's the last 6 months average rate. That's well below 3. So it looks like there's a good chance we're going to get to 2% inflation rate. At the same time, with the unemployment rate not going up. And we thought that was impossible.
Something very unexpected, right?
Yeah, according to Phillips curve, which is standard anchoring economic theory is, unemployment rate comes down, inflation goes up. Inflation comes down, unemployment goes. There's inverse relationship between the two. We managed to go from 9% inflation rate all the way down to 3, while keeping the unemployment rate at 3.7%, which is like 40-year low. It's an amazing accomplishment by the Fed. But at the same time, despite all this good news, U.S. consumers are feeling miserable. Now, this is something that I have not seen in the last 30 years of studying economics, which is divergence between consumer confidence versus consumer sentiment. So these are two measures we kind of use on a monthly basis to see how the consumers are feeling about the economy. If you ask consumers about their jobs, employment situations, ability to find another job, do you feel secure? We're at a boom period. That's the dark bar at the top. But if you ask consumers how you feel about going into shopping and buying things and household finances, we're at the index level of 80. That's from the University of Michigan. We're in a deep recession-like period. So that's the disconnect. Economy seems to be doing well if you look at the employment data, but if you look at consumer sentiment, we're feeling miserable. And main reason is because if you took a nap for the last 2.5 years and just woke up, everything around you is 20 to 25% more expensive. And if you want to,
it's a huge paradox, isn't it? It's a huge paradox between what we're getting, the reporting we're getting from our governments. I mean, the same is true of the UK. and yet what we're all feeling in our pockets on a daily basis.
You got to be very careful. Inflation rate is still about 3%. Now, that means prices are still going up. But when you add up all the cumulative effects, the last 3 years of inflation, it's just the entire price range increased by 20 to 25%. And this is all happening at the time US consumers are running out of their excess savings from COVID stimulus checks. And I'm sure most of you got 3 checks if you were living in the United States, $1,200, $800, $600. We had about $2.1 trillion worth of excess savings. And as of last November, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, we're down to about $300 billion. And right now, based on our estimate and the San Francisco Fed, we're burning through about $50 billion a month, which means we will be out of all that excess savings by about March, April of this year. And result of that, I think there's a linkage to the previous slide. The total outstanding debt on credit cards in the United States is at the record level. In fact, last 3 months, we added extra $150 billion to it. We have not seen that type of increase ever. And at the same time, if you look at the graph on the right, which is kind of disturbing, this is 30-day delinquency rate. We're well above 3%, which we think in the industry, that's the safe range, and we're marching towards 4%. And if we get to 5%, we're looking into a sure recession. And then this is, I don't want to get super nerdy on some of the audiences, but we live in a real world. So I don't care what the nominal interest rate is. Real interest rate is what drives the real economy. So when inflation rate was 5%, if the interest rate was 5% and inflation was 8%, I could, in theory, borrow at 5%, buy commodities, and let it rise 8%. I'm still better off by 3%. So that's a negative interest rate. It encourages borrowing and risk-taking. But now interest rate is 5% overnight in the US. Inflation rate is 3% now. Now we have a real positive interest rate. And last time we saw anything like that was the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. And if you look at the graph on the right, many nerdy economists like me were saying, come on, Fed, this is getting very restrictive. It's going to cause pain. Remember, there was
I just pick you up on that point, actually, John. Just pick you up on that point, because I think that's the point that a lot of people, certainly watching this webinar, people at home, we hear a lot of conversation about interest rates. Mortgage rates have obviously gone up, and in some cases have doubled, as people's mortgage deals have come to an end. But certainly, interest rates as a whole, inflation has come down significantly, and they're not bringing interest rates down in the same correlation. So when do you see interest rates starting to kind of come back down in line with the rate at which they went up?
I think we all want them to lower the interest rate, to rebalance the real interest rate around 0%, 1%. That's the neutral rate based on our analysis. But they can't, because we still have one last mile to go on the fight against inflation. We're at 3%, we need to get down to 2%. Right. And according to the last Fed speak, they are data dependent, and they want to be 100% sure they dealt with the inflation before they start lowering the interest rate. If you look at the futures market right now, if we were having this conversation last month, I would have said first rate cut was March. Everyone was banking on it. But now it's July, maybe it's September. But now on the side note, remember we talked about a credit card balance that Americans have? On average credit card, the interest rate that people are paying right now is 22, 24% in the US. And if the real interest rate is at 2% positive, that's going to be a very painful drag on the consumer.
Absolutely.
And now we're beginning to see the cracks in the consumer households. And one of my I shouldn't say favorite, but one of the most reliable economic indicator is the auto loan delinquency rate. And that's because we need cars to go to work. So we will make payments if we can. But if we start defaulting on it, then that's a sign there's a lot of stress. And as you can see, that's based on different age cohort. It's usually the younger folks experiencing the stress more. And that's because their income on average is lower than baby boomers like me. But it's coming. There's a crack. There's a consumer pyramid, and the bottom is cracking. And we're already seeing that a lot of folks are taking money out of 401k plan for emergency reasons, the pension they saved up. So they all point towards sign that the consumers have maxed out. They're stressed with high prices, and consumers represent 70% of the U.S. economy. So if you look at classic recession indicator the Fed uses, especially the Fed out of New York, using yield curve and everything else, there's a 63% chance we may see a contraction second half of this year. Now, if you look at the leading economic indicator, so these are forward-looking data, not the backward-looking data we've been discussing. We're already in the recessionary territory.
Yeah.
There's a good chance you're going to see a downturn. But many people who are in and doing the forecast, no one's really calling for a recession this year. In fact, I kind of concur with IMF's forecast that they expect the U.S. economic growth rate to be about 2.1, kind of stagnant 2.1, down from 2.5. And the globally is about 3.1, which is down from about 3.7, 3.8. And you're saying, John, how could that be? You just told us consumers maxed out their crap, and yet you were expecting positive growth. Now, my estimate is like Congressional Budget Office, which is about 1.5, 1.6. I go with 1.8, back of the envelope. The main reason is something amazing is happening. Just like the real interest rate is important for the real economy, it's not the nominal wages that drives the economic consumption. It's the real wages. So now the wages has been going up in the U.S. at 4.5 to 4.6 for the past 2-3 years, for demographic reasons. We just don't have enough workers to support economy this size because baby boomers are retiring. Oh, here's a scary stat. Every day, starting from last week, 11,000 baby boomers are retiring every single day in the U.S. because they're turning 65. And at 65, they qualify for Medicaid. So watch out.
Wow, that is a big number, and I wonder how many down in the next generation are coming through. And it's probably a lot less than 11,000 retiring, right?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of our clients are still saying, God, we can't find good quality workers. So that's because the labor force size is fundamentally small. Smaller, about 3 to 4 million compared to pre-COVID days. But here's the reality. So you have to pay a little bit more. And you're seeing that with all the unions like UAW, Teamsters, getting this huge wage increases. So right now, average hourly earnings is rising at about 4.55%. But inflation is 3%. You have a real wage gains. And timing was perfect. This kicked in as we were running out of excess savings and maxing out a credit card. But we all have jobs. We're getting paycheck. There's a real wage gains. We're spending still.
Yeah.
And that's really going to be driving the economic growth for this year instead of having a contraction. Now, someone might say, John, if the wage increase is going at 4.5%, it's going to feed into inflation again because companies would be forced to raise the prices to cover higher wages. But that's not happening this year, and that explains the disinflation I've been talking about, which is, surprise, productivity just doubled in the last 6 months compared to the past 10, 12 years. We don't know why, because productivity is something hard to measure, and they're very volatile.
Yeah, very difficult to measure.
Yeah, if we're having this conversation pre-COVID, labor productivity increased in U.S. at 1.5, 1.6, but now it's growing at 3.5, close to 4%. We don't know. My concern, by the way, productivity was my dissertation topic back in the day, is that the productivity, they come and go. And it's temporary, it's transitory. And right now we're getting the benefits of it. If those bars disappear in next coming quarters, then now companies have a problem in the US. They need to pay higher wages, but they're not getting the productivity gain to make up for it. So either they're forced to raise prices or reduce their margin. So they're going to be a tough spot. But right now, productivity is holding. So my fingers are also crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Yeah, so our entire economic forecast of little bit of growth, no contraction, is based on my fingers being crossed and this magic of higher
That's
productivity.
good to know, John. That's good to know.
There's no data set. AI is having this effect. AI, it's too early for the AI to have effect on productivity numbers.
It won't answer the question yet.
Yeah, exactly.
You can ask it, but it won't answer.
Well, so now let's go to uncertainty. So with the very fragile state the U.S. economy and the rest of the world is in, it won't take that much a shock to make us have a hard landing or bumpy landing. And one area I'm looking at is the geopolitical issues. Obviously, we just talked about that. Supply shock. I know right now we're focusing on Suez Canal situation because Houthis folks are using drones and all that. The bottom line is 80 to 90% of global commerce, the trade flow, they're done by ships, big container ships. And they have a well-established trade routes, but they're very risky. It's a tough. Now, back in the day, U.S. guaranteed freedom of navigation with 600 ships. Now we're down to 230. We're stretched in the U.S. as well. So if something goes wrong in Suez Canal, that's about 25% of global trade that's going to be affected. And I know some people are talking about China, South China Sea and all that. It's Taiwan. Yeah, I get it. Computer chips are important. But real reason is that area is 50% of global trade that goes through the area. Yeah. So whoever owns the sea lane could put a choke on global trade. So that's really risky. But right now, just based on a couple of ships getting hit through the Suez Canal, the traffic through the Suez Canal is down 60% as of last week. And now shipment from Asia to Europe, especially, there's additional 10 days of delay. And now we're beginning to see the shipping costs are increasing. So moving one container across these shipping lanes, the prices have tripled, and it's still going up as we speak, as the conflict escalates. And now it's showing up on Purchasing Managers Index. The folks who are buying this raw materials for manufacturing, wholesale, they're seeing shipping is getting delayed, it's causing some problems at the ports. And we know from the past experience, well, I shouldn't say past, it was just recent, 2 years ago, but the China shutdown and the supply chain issues at the ports around the world, there's a direct relationship between the shipping cost and inflation. So if the situation gets worse in Suez Canal, if something happens in South Sea China, then guess what? There would be inflationary pressure to the US and the rest of the world. Fed will be forced to even hike interest rate, let alone cutting it. And that's going to
that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point, isn't it? Prices just going up again, and inflation reacting, and then we're in a kind of spiral.
By the way, I'm getting super nerdy here. Based on our last 2 years of analysis, disinflation that we have seen is mostly driven by supply chain normalizing and China coming back online. Now, if the supply chain gets to be distorted again, then we're right back up to inflation rate of 3, 4, 5%. So we got to be very careful.
Yeah.
The next wild card, or I call it potential exogenous shock that could just rock our forecast, is the election that's coming up in U.S. in November. And we have seen in the past, this was after the result was announced 2016 election when the Trump administration took over the White House. There was an immediate dramatic effect on Mexican peso and Chinese yuan. And I'm not saying that's going to happen again. I will defer that to trading expert sitting next to me. Your thoughts? What do you think?
Well, I mean, we've already seen some volatility start to come in peso this year. Yeah. As Trump closes in on the Republican nomination, it's just an added pressure onto this currency pair. So, we don't necessarily think that peso might shoot back up to where it's been over the last couple of years. We do see a continuation of this sort of super peso that we've talked about over the last few months, especially because the U.S.'s highest trading partner now is Mexico.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
there is
I like that. Super peso. That's a great term.
Super peso. Yeah, we love to talk about it. There's a bit of risk to peso if Trump comes back into office, but we don't want to hang our hat on it yet.
So the bottom line, election does have consequences. And this time, I think it's not just going to be Mexican peso, Chinese yuan. I think euro might be at a risk of tremendous volatility just because difference in policy stands about what's happening with the NATO, Ukraine. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, that's going to happen, but people are going to get nervous as the poll numbers change in coming weeks and months. I think it's going to be reflected in more volatility in the exchange rates. And then, of course, there's a difference in policies with tariffs and everything else. Deep dive into effects of tariff. Bottom line, tariffs taxes on consumers. And as I said, American consumers are maxed out. They're under a lot of stress. If there's any talk of tariffs going up to 60% for all Chinese imports, oh, watch out. That's going to be a tremendous amount of tax on US consumers. That may tip us over into a contractionary period. Now, last day, no one is talking about it, but I do love that quote from Jamie Dimon, my hero. He says, this is the most predictable crisis they were not talking about in the US history, which is our outstanding fiscal debt. Now, both Biden and Trump administrations, they don't have good track record when it comes to managing fiscal policies. And it's still going up as we speak. One number I want to just point out, just to give a sense of how serious the problem is getting, is that little circle area on the bottom. That's the amount of payment we have to make just to cover the interest for this year. Forget about paying off the debt, the principal. Just to keep this thing going, financing charges. Obviously, we didn't have to worry about it too much when interest rate was zero for about 10 years or so. But now with the rising interest rate, higher interest rate with positive real interest rate, it's biting us. So by end of December this year, the total amount of funds we're using to pay just the interest is going to be greater than the entire money we spend on national defense. In 3 years, it's going to be greater than Social Security. And the bottom line is this is going to be a major drag on U.S. economic performance. That's why our best case scenario for this year, assuming productivity holds and assuming the shocks don't happen, we will grow 1.5%. But if we're having this conversation next year, assuming nothing changes, just because of fiscal drag, we may be growing at 1.2, 1.3%. And I just don't know whether we have a will to address it, but that's outside the area of economics. So I just stop at this point. So here's the bottom message. I don't think it's going to be a nice, smooth, soft landing. I think it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be bumpy. I don't think it's going to crash, but it's going to be very, very bumpy. And I think you need to be prepared for it.
That is super. Thank you. That is an excellent summary of economic conditions, both nationally and geopolitically. I think, Helen, we did promise the audience how to thrive in uncertainty. So I guess with a lot of that there, John, from you, I think let's focus on what we can do now. I think what I'd like to do, Helen, is focus on your capacity, in your role as Associate Director of Trading, Currency Trader at Monex. How do you go about distilling all that information? I mean, how do you prioritize what you feel could have the most relevant, significant impact to businesses operating globally? And I guess most importantly, what can businesses do to protect themselves? Because I think thrive, it's a big word, but I think, thriving can sometimes be, not going backwards, in certain situations. And I think, what can businesses do to protect themselves from the uncertainty that John has outlined there? I think that's really, if we could start there.
Yeah, well, so I'm going to start more with the distilling all the information we just got and putting it into sort of a forecast and an exchange rate. What an exchange rate is, it's fundamentally a bet on the health of an economy. So if you're looking at British pound versus US dollar or euro versus US dollar, you look at everything John just outlined, and then you have to do that again in that region. So, well, sure, there might be cracks showing in the United States economy. They might be worse overseas. I mean, if you take a look at UK and Europe in particular, that we got last week shows both of those economies are in a recession. The US is not in a recession yet. So we've seen some strengthening of US dollar over those economies, especially in the last couple of months. As those economies slide deeper and deeper into contractionary and recessionary territory, the US, by most high standards of economics, still doing pretty well. Consumers are definitely feeling some pain, but our economy is growing at an unprecedented rate. Unemployment rate is remaining low because of, labor factors that John outlined. But all in all, U.S. economy is pretty healthy. That could stand to change, and that's kind of where we come in. We're looking through the remainder of this year at, a slow depreciation of the United States dollar against the euro and the pound and a lot of G10 currencies. Our thought is that these economies may be feeling the sort of economic pain that we're looking at coming into the US. They're feeling it first. So they've lost some ground, these currencies, over the last couple of months, but that stands to kind of flip as the year goes on. So with pound and euro in particular, because those economies are already in a recession and the US isn't really at risk of one just yet, they've seen some depreciation. But policy-wise, their central banks and their governments are taking action to fix their economic situation. The US hasn't had to do this yet. So over the course of this year, we do think that US dollar stands to lose a bit of ground to the tune of, roughly 4% compared to where we are now. Peso is a little bit different, and we do handle a lot of peso. Our neighbors to the south, we have a lot of trade with them. Peso gained a lot of ground, in particular in 2021 and 2022, and then it started to continue that trend of strength in 2023 as we saw the impacts of trade battles between the US and China, and those kind of trickled down into local economies. So Mexico became the US's biggest trading partner last year, and it still is to this day. However, there's a risk to that, and we do see geopolitical dynamics in the US and in Mexico. Both countries have elections coming up this year to stand to put some kind of take the heat off the peso a little bit. We see it depreciating to the tune of 5-6% this year, but within those moves, there's going to be a lot of volatility in the interim. So I can give you a number: 5% swing by the end of this year. At one point, it could be 10. One point, USD could gain 10%. There's going to be movement.
Big swing. That is a big swing, right? 5 to 10%.
I mean, if you're working on a 10% profit margin, 1% move is going to impact your profit margin. So that's why it's so important to protect yourself and to put together a strategy. Have us help you put together a strategy. This is what we do for our clients to make sure that your bottom line is going to be protected. I just put together a couple examples here. I mentioned earlier that pound sterling, weakened a little bit since November, December, but we got the news last week. The UK is officially in a recession, but pound sterling didn't necessarily lose a lot of ground because of that. And, this is because it's always a two-way street, all of these dynamics. It's not just about one factor. We got the news that the UK is in a recession. However, the Bank of England did not then immediately go and say, oh, well, we have to cut interest rates right now. So they're probably going to keep their interest rates higher. Fed is also going to keep them high for a while. But it highlights the fact that everything matters in context rather than just on its own.
I just want to focus in on that stat, and interestingly enough, what you said there, because obviously the UK interest rates are at 5.25%, right? So from a perspective of hot money, you're going to get a better return on your sterling. So even though we're talking about a recession, you're going to get a better return in the UK. So UK is not going to, sterling isn't going to weaken. But let's just focus in on that stat. So working on a 10% profit margin, a 1% move in the desired currency pair can result in a 10%. Of course, that makes sense. So when you're saying a 5% move in Mexican peso, you could be talking about a 50% knock in your profit margin.
Yeah, that's half your profit margin right there. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, just that move. And I think people often look at those moves and think, well, it'll come back, or it's not very much. When you start equating it like that, and I think going back to what John was saying there, price increases, profit margins are getting smaller, because if you want to keep those clients and you want to keep those customers buying your product, you can't just keep reflecting your price increase in theirs. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. My job is to pay attention to markets across the world and distill it into this one number that is a price that you're getting. So I have to look out for it and put together a forecast. We do have excellent forecasts written for annual, and we write one monthly. And we try and translate our expertise into a forecast and a strategy for each client. I mean, and this is what we're talking about. You have a lot of considerations when you're putting together your foreign exchange needs for the year. If you have one invoice to fulfill, say in Europe for 100,000 euros, or if you have €1 million that you need, any change in the exchange rate is going to change how much it actually costs to you. It's not a change in the bill that you got from your supplier. It's a change in factors that you can't influence, but you can look out for them. So a few things you can do here. You can have a budget rate for foreign exchange, which means this is the target that you've set out for the year. If you have to make 12 euro payments in 1 year, Here is what you're targeting your exchange rate to be, helps have an accurate projection of where your expenses are going to end up at the end of the year. With that, you want to have a cash flow forecast as well, so you know how much you have to pay, how much you need to pay, and make sure that everything is going to work together and in your favor. You know, there is some inherent risk to the FX market. It's just a factor of risk in the global economy. And as John mentioned a lot, there are a lot of events that are going to drive uncertainty this year. So how are you looking out for that? How are you making sure that you can protect yourself? And if you're thinking about a specific project, how long is this project? What sort of timeline are you on? Invoice terms? And where do we think at the end of this project your exchange rate is going to be? You know, there are always things that we can't predict. Biggest example of that is a global pandemic that shut down everything.
Yeah, black swan. Yeah.
So, yeah, black swan events. So, you know, how do you protect yourself from those?
I think that's a really important point as well. Sorry to interject there. I think it's a really important point because I mean, I saw it over Brexit. You can go to sleep one night thinking there's going to be a specific outcome because that's what's being forecast.
Mhm.
You come back in the next day and it doesn't look anything like what it did 12 hours ago. And you've done nothing to protect yourself against both outcomes. And I think you're absolutely right there. A black swan event like the pandemic, I mean, the acceleration of the pandemic situation was so quick. It took people by complete surprise. Having nothing in place to protect yourself means you're just completely exposed, right? Just completely exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And another great example of this, great for, you know, illustrating volatility, is the war in Ukraine. We walked back into the office the next morning and euro had depreciated 4% overnight. There was absolutely no one that saw it coming. And, you know, that can mean 40% loss in profit margin.
That's right. Simon, you know, I built all these models and things like that, but everything that we just talked about, you cannot model it.
No, you can't model black swan.
No, it's not a linear event. It's just random exogenous shocks, and it just ruins the forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
can't, but you can prepare for what might happen.
Prepare for it. You can prepare for it. Okay.
Yeah. So just generally speaking, our business is making payments in foreign exchange. And with that is a certain amount of risk. Our job is to take it off the table. Spot trades, that's standard fulfillment of an invoice delivered in 2 days. That is, here is the FX market right now. This is the price you're getting outright. But where we really like to push people to move towards is forward products and market orders. These are ways to protect yourself against volatility in the market. Forward contract, in the simplest terms, is you see a rate of exchange today, you have a certain duration of time, or you have a certain amount of the foreign exchange currency that you have to pay something in, you get that same price the whole time. That way you can budget around it. You can make sure that you are protected from adverse movement in pricing.
And anyone can take a forward contract out, right? There's not a financial, application,
Absolutely.
Consideration. It's just any business that has a requirement to make foreign currency payments overseas. They're doing them on a spot basis. They could do a forward.
Yeah, absolutely. If you know the terms of the invoices you need to pay, the project length that you have, or even just the amount of currency you need over the course of a year, 2 years, you can get a price and you can hold it, you can budget around it, and you can make sure that your exposure is protected.
Yeah, there's no qualification. It's just if you have that requirement, right? That's interesting.
Yeah. We also do offer market orders. I like these as a tool to take advantage of positive market movements. You know, we've talked a lot about the doom and gloom and how we can stand to lose money. But what a market order does, you tell us a budget rate that you are looking for. And if the FX market at any point in time reaches that price, we'll buy the currency for you. So that's a nice way to, yes, you can protect yourself against adverse movements, but this is another way to take advantage of positive movements rather than just being stuck making a spot payment and a trade might have.
And obviously the foreign exchange market's 24/7, right? Or 24/5, sorry. So, you can be asleep and Tokyo can be moving, and you can take advantage of price movements that you might not see in your own trading hours.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a great way for you to not have to pay attention all the time.
Yeah. And then, that's your role, right? As the account manager, that you're taking that not only the risk off the table, but you're taking that administration off the table. You don't have to have that third eye looking at the foreign exchange market.
Mhm.
Simon, Helen doesn't sleep.
No, I guessed that already.
Seriously, doesn't sleep.
I try to sleep sometimes, but we do also have.
Let's have a look at an example here of someone that you've actually worked with.
So this is just a basic example I put together. So say you need to buy from Europe parts for a crane. You know that it's going to cost you 2 million euro total, and you need to pay 350,000 euro a month. You've put together a budget rate of 112, but if you're looking at a market price of 107, you don't want to execute that contract at that budget rate. You can execute it now versus then waiting, potentially reaching your budget rate or going through it and losing money. So if you execute that contract now, we can build out a contract for you. It's fixated forward. If you know the date that each payment has to be made, you can take advantage of that, spot rates at 107, 108 through the entire length of time that you have that project live. So you put together an expiry, it's a fancy term for the end of a contract. At the end of each month, you already have that price and we just make the payment for you. You can also do a partial exposure for this whole project length. So you could say, do contracts monthly for 200,000 euro. And then you can, play around a little bit with that last 150,000. Maybe if the market's a little in your favor, you can make even more extra money. But as it stands with that forward contract, you're already doing better than your budget rate. So you're adding to your profit margin.
You're banking the advantage, right? And I think most importantly at the same time is you're protecting that. I think often people tend to look at this and they think, well, I said 107, there's a big buffer there to 112. But then if you take into consideration what you've talked about, black swan events, boiling, situations that could come to a head at any moment, very easily it could be back at 110, 111. And then you're kind of like, shall I, shan't I? If only I could get a bit better. I think you bank and you protect in that scenario, don't you?
Yeah, through the month of January alone, we saw a euro movement of 3.5%. So this can change at the drop of a hat. Yeah. Another brief example, we also work with a lot of Canadian clients. So say that you're based in Canada, you need to pay a US supplier for something. You have total requirement of $5 million US for the year, but you don't know your payment dates. You do, however, have a budget rate put together. So if you look at the way the Canadian dollar has moved this year, Canadian dollar has depreciated against US dollars something like 2.5% over the course of this year. So you would have been better off taking advantage of the market at the beginning of the year rather than now. If you don't know your payment dates, what do you do here? It's another thing we like to do called window forwards, where you don't have to have the contract expire on a specific day, specific time. This is you take your exposure over the course of a year and you can use that forward contract whenever you need it. You can also couple this in with market orders. So if you have, a random payment come up, but you don't have to make it for 30 days, want to play around in the market a little bit, see what happens, you can put in a market order for any exposure that you have come up sporadically and maybe stand to benefit a little extra.
So it gives you the flexibility then, right? It gives you the flexibility. If you don't know those specific dates, but you can still take advantage and you can still protect it. So it's that client out there who says, well, I don't know when I've got to pay. I know I've got a requirement coming up in end of Q2, Q3, but I don't know exactly when. It doesn't matter. You can protect. We can do a far date window, as you say, window forward, and then you can take that currency as the date becomes live.
As you need it. And you still have that same upfront price. So your budget is not changing. You know exactly what you're getting the whole time. You don't have to hope the market moves in your favor.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. We like to describe ourselves as both agile and prepared. It's kind of it's a fine line to walk, but I think we do it pretty well.
Double benefit.
Yeah. Just the most important thing that I want to tell people is you can choose to do nothing. That is a strategy. But then you're at a large risk of taking a loss on any of these contracts, and you could stand to lose a lot of your profit margin. It's a strategy. It is a risky strategy and it's a gamble. And, I'm not personally a betting man. So I don't recommend it. And we can talk ourselves blue about what we think might happen over the course of the next year. The fact of the matter is, nobody really knows. I mean, if we had a crystal ball, we'd be sitting on the beach.
We've all got the same crystal ball, haven't we?
Yeah, everyone has the same crystal ball. It's just a factor of who's paying attention to it for you. And foreign exchange markets open 24 hours a day, 5 days a week.
I think that's an interesting point there. I think I think very often people tend to feel, well, if I choose a price now, I'm speculating that something's going to happen or not happen. So I am speculating by choosing a price. Well, actually, it's quite the opposite. To do nothing is to speculate. You're just leaving it to the to the universe to sort out for you. I think what Helen said there is absolutely critical. It's about protection. I think I've got an interesting stat here that I found before we went live. 50% of the democracies on the planet have general elections in 2024. 50%. And as we know, some of them closer to home are pretty tenuous. And those outcomes could cause major swings either way. I mean, you've got, as we saw there, we've got the war going on in Ukraine and Russia, in Europe. You've got huge tensions in the Middle East. Something that could boil over at any moment. And then, as John mentioned, the shipping lanes and the traffic through the Suez Canal, and then you pull in perhaps the China-Taiwan situation. And I don't think there's a time in my career in financial markets that I've seen such a collective level of uncertainty through different pieces all coming together at once. And I think the time to be vigilant, right? The time.
One more. I mean, we got a short program, but I haven't talked about the effects of the weather, global warming. Right now, shipping traffic through the Panama Canal is down 30%. There's no rain. There's no water. They have to slow down the traffic. Farmers are protesting around the world because they're having ill effects. That's going to affect the food prices, inflation, and your election. So weather is going to further compound the whole uncertainty.
Well, that's the last bit of the cherry on the cake, right? I think the important thing is here, though, is in terms of what we set out to achieve on the course of this webinar. How can I thrive through this uncertainty? Look, as much as I've seen times, through my career where the world was going to end tomorrow, it didn't, and things very happily changed for the better overnight. So let's be pragmatic, but I think that's not important. I think we could see things turn overnight, at the flip of a coin almost, which sounds rather flippant, but it's true. I think some of these influences, some of these events we can influence. I mean, look, we can go to the polls and we can vote for whoever we like, so we can have some influence on the outcome. But we certainly can't control the outcome. And the message that's come through today for me is that I can't control the outcome. But what I can do is I can protect myself against the outcome. And so it's not about trying to second guess what's going to happen. It's not about forming our own opinion. It's about, and as Helen said there in her example, for me, it's about taking that example. I have a budget rate. I can see my cash flow forecast. The market is at a certain level. What I'd like to do is put that to bed for 12 months. I'd like to protect that. I'd like to take myself out of the game of uncertainty so that I can get on with what I do best, which is thriving in my business, living my life. And I think that's the most important thing here. It's not about trying to second guess it. It's not about taking advantage. It's not about finding that extra bit of profit margin. What it's actually about is protecting ourselves against what could happen. And as I say to people a lot, what are you doing to prepare yourself for what could happen? And that's fundamentally really important. So look, that brings us to the end of today. Thank you so much for joining us. Please email us any questions. We were going to have a Q&A at the end of this, but we just don't have time. We've been going 45 minutes. I did promise you 40 minutes. But if you have any questions for us, please email us at hello@monexusa.com. We will be sending out the slides from today's presentation to all of the people who registered for the webinar. So, and also this recording will be available on LinkedIn for you to view at another day. This is going to be the first in a series of webinars that we're going to run from Amidst USA. We're going to be drilling down into some of these economic conditions as they develop. We're going to be looking at the geopolitical instability as it develops, but we're also going to be drilling down more into what can be done. If you are a business in the USA right now and you have an exposure to overseas trade, and i.e. you're paying currencies for your goods, or you're receiving currencies because you're an exporter, or perhaps you're a private individual and you're moving money in large assets around, what can be done to protect yourselves against this instability and volatility that we're seeing, that John and Helen so eloquently put together for us then. So really, with that, it just remains for me to thank John and Helen for your time. Give us a wave. Thank you very much for joining us today in this conversation. Be sure to follow Amidst USA on LinkedIn so you keep updated about what webinar is coming next. We're going to do something in about the next 4 to 6 weeks. So all that's left for me is to thank you for joining us today. And we wish you all the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.